What's up, everybody? And today we're checking out the Siege of Crimea is working. This is by Warfronts. We've watched a couple of their videos in the past. Very informative, very good. I will leave a link down below to the original video. If you're not subscribed to Warfronts already, please go over there, share some love. It's really important that we do this. Anybody, in my opinion, covering the stuff out in Ukraine needs to be supported. We need to talk about this more. We need to get the word out more. We need to support the lads out in Ukraine fighting against the Russians because they're being invaded, and that sucks, doesn't it? Before we get started, check out Chug, 10% off, link down below. It is summer. The summer solstice has come and gone, but it's still hot as balls out. If you want to keep your drink cold, get yourself a Chug. You can literally take the inside out and put it in your dishwasher after you've had a few beverages to protect your wood. Sustainable wood, handmade wood here in the UK by a small business. Support small businesses. Free customization, free bag, 10% off, link down below. Also, check out my business, Morale, if you haven't already. And also check out the charity link down in the description because I'm doing a hike in the Highlands of Scotland where my ancestors are from to raise money to fight cancer. All right. Less than a minute and a half. I'm pretty proud of that. Pretty proud of that one. All right. This guy's on everything, innit?
Life in occupied Crimea is beginning to break down, and Russia has no idea how to stop it. Across the last couple of months, and especially in the span of the last few weeks, Ukrainian forces have hammered the Crimean Peninsula at long range in a constant barrage of drones and missiles that's only getting more intense by the day. The fuel supply has run out, tens of thousands of people are trying to escape while they can, and chaos, panic, and even hunger are starting to really set in. Ukraine's intention isn't to invade Crimea and take it back, or at least not yet. Instead, Ukraine intends to make Crimea truly, completely ungovernable and force its Russian occupiers into a state of total breakdown.
And they're succeeding as well. If you've been watching the news, it's been absolutely insane how much they've been succeeding.
Through its long-range siege of the territory, Ukraine hopes to do more than simply degrade the Russian military. Instead, Kyiv is trying to lure Moscow into a trap, and right now the strategy seems to be working rather flawlessly. Russia has occupied Crimea since 2014 and regards it as annexed Russian territory. It's the crown jewel of Vladimir Putin's military project in Ukraine and the pride and joy of the Russian elite. To defend Crimea is an increasingly costly and dangerous proposition, but to abandon Crimea is unthinkable. The trouble for Russia, of course, is that that's exactly what Ukraine is betting on.
The thing is as well, it's something that can be isolated quite easily with the bridges if they get destroyed, etc. Granted, getting into that area with a navy is quite difficult, but still, it's basically a peninsula, a massive one, that can be taken. It wouldn't surprise me if Ukraine go ahead and take it back.
A few months before this episode was released, something changed on the battlefields of eastern Ukraine. After years of fast-paced, highly innovative drone warfare near the front lines, Kyiv unveiled a new suite of drones optimized for a different purpose. Not to attack at short or long range, but at mid-range. AI-enabled, cheap to use in massive numbers, and surprisingly fast, the new drones subverted many of the expectations that both sides of this war had learned to live by. Russian jamming was no longer effective, and Ukraine no longer had to worry about maintaining a heavy, cumbersome connection to its drones through fiber optic cables.
Yeah.
At the start of the spring fighting season, Ukraine used its new tools for a very specific purpose: to undercut the supply lines and logistics that would have powered a massive Russian spring offensive and throw that offensive into complete disarray. By this
It definitely seems like 2026 is the year that Russia they're really panicking right now. My biggest worry is that because Vladimir Putin is such an absolutely insane maniac, is that the moment he does notice that there's no other option than the fact that he's lost the war, that he ends up nuking or something like that. God forbid it happens, but this is what crazy people do. And it blows me, it pisses me off so much because on the one hand, you see footage of the World Cup in Canada, the United States and Mexico, and you see all these countries get together and they're having a blast together. And it just goes to show that all this hatred in these wars are fueled by the few, but they affect the many. People like Vladimir Putin, who are just power-hungry, greedy people wanting more and more land. And it's sad. It's really sad. Ukraine doesn't want to be part of Russia. Don't be like a toxic ex that wants them back and is forcing you to be back. Because let's say that Russia did take Ukraine in 3 days, which it didn't. It's taken over 1,500 days. All the people living in Ukraine are going to be resentful of Russia. Literally like a toxic ex. It's ridiculous. It's such a stupid idea.
Ukraine had secured drone dominance in the eastern Donbass region, where the main thrust of Russia's offensive was supposed to take place. The fighting in that area still continues, and Russia is grinding forward incredibly slowly at massive cost in a war where, according to recent posts by Russian military bloggers, Moscow's troops along some parts of the front have a life expectancy of 20 to 35 minutes once they reach the front line. Now that Ukraine has established control of the situation there, its mid-range drone forces have a bit of spare capacity, and most of that capacity is now focused on Crimea. To understand the way Ukraine has structured its Crimea campaign, we first have to understand something about this territory. It's relatively isolated, mostly surrounded by water, and has no natural land connection to the Russian mainland. That's a problem the Kremlin has worked very hard to rectify, first by establishing reliable ferry and ship infrastructure, then by building the prized Kerch Strait Bridge that opened in 2018, and finally by constructing a network of highway and rail lines running through the occupied Ukrainian east. Those routes through occupied territory have been especially important. They've made the Kerch Bridge less of a practical target for Ukraine, and they've greatly increased the volume of supplies, fuel, and fighting equipment that can reach the peninsula. But because of the way this war has gone before 2026, Russia's ambitions in Crimea could basically be summed up as guard duty. The Black Sea Fleet has been mostly forced to abandon the area due to the constant threat of Ukrainian sea drones, but
that's another thing I need to learn more about: sea drones. We see all sorts of different drones, right? All over the skies, whether that be the small DJI drones that are being strapped with bombs, whether that be these massive long-range recce drones, all sorts of different stuff. But sea drones are something that I just haven't really touched on yet, and we should really look into it, shouldn't we?
Russia's front lines were holding. The routes through occupied territory were safe, and Ukraine had neither the manpower nor the positional advantages that would allow for a direct assault on the area. So when Ukrainian mid-range drones started to target Crimea, they didn't focus on the territory itself as much as they focused on the supply chain.
Yeah.
Those routes through occupied territory, and especially a key highway known as the R280, were well within range of Ukrainian drones. The routes weren't unguarded exactly, but they were minimally guarded, with mobile air defense teams using machine guns and a handful of more capable surface-to-air systems. Ukraine turned its attention to the R280, but the rest was history. Open source trackers indicate that many hundreds of supply and fuel trucks have been confirmed destroyed along the highway, and the true total is probably somewhere in the thousands.
Wow.
Ukraine has been especially diligent about striking fuel convoys, which sustain Crimea's military defense, but also
there's obviously a balance here as well, because there's civvies that live there, or they're having to evacuate, I'm pretty sure, or they have evacuated. And because I was seeing like videos of civvies, like Russian people living in Crimea, upset that they have to like emergency evacuate from stolen land, which is ridiculous. But I think this is where Ukraine have had to be very delicate, because they technically could just blow up the bridges, right? But they don't want to do that for many different reasons, whether that be for the civvies that are driving on them in the first place, and that can be quite dangerous for them. So it's a very like delicate situation, isn't it? Plus, also the way of blowing it up would be incredibly difficult, and there's loads of other political stuff going along with it, but still.
Its civil infrastructure. They went after train locomotives as well as the railway lines themselves. Ukraine also started targeting the road and rail bridges that lead into Crimean territory across a treacherous wetland area. As it turns out, Russia lacked the ability to really do anything about the Ukrainian offensive, and as Ukraine's campaign started to generate real results, Russia found itself unable to right the ship. Instead, the strikes have had a compounding effect, with every Ukrainian hit making subsequent hits more likely. With the R280 highway growing too dangerous, Russia has had to push its trucks onto back roads, where they have to drive much slower and create wear and tear on asphalt that's not built to handle them. Russia's thought to have lost hundreds of well-trained truck drivers who were tasked with doing a job that's much more difficult than global observers tend to give credit.
You have to remember as well, like these trucks being blown up that have Russians in them that are driving to Crimea with supplies, like these drivers don't. This is the thing, like a lot of these people getting killed, a lot of the Russians on the front line, a lot of the Ukrainians on the front line, none of them want to be there. All of them, I guarantee, would much prefer to be sat at home with the family, a nice cold beer, relaxing, watching the footy or watching something, or even just sitting around a fire. I guarantee it, all of them, oh, well, probably not all of them, the majority of them would much prefer to do that and not be roped into something stupid like this because of the greed of Putin.
Every destroyed bridge makes the surviving bridges more important, but also reduces the number of spots that Ukraine needs to surveil, meaning that those bridges are more easily targeted. The Russian military has tried to respond by using pontoon bridges, but those well, they're getting blown up too. They've tried to shift to ferries, but Ukrainian strikes have now forced the ferry services to shut down as well. Better yet for Ukraine, Russia's reaction to devastating strikes elsewhere, especially at a critical refinery in Moscow, has been to shift its air defense systems back toward Russia's biggest cities. With finite air defenses available, that's only made Ukrainian strikes on Crimea easy to accomplish. And as Ukraine destroys more infrastructure across Russia and creates acknowledged fuel shortages in the vast majority of Russian oblasts, there's even less excess to go around. What Crimea has and what Russia can supply in the immediate vicinity becomes even more valuable, so it becomes even more costly to lose. And now that the stage has been properly set, Ukraine's drones have started pummeling Crimea itself. Over the course of several weeks, Ukraine destroyed all of Crimea's above-ground fuel storage capacity, along with power stations, electrical wires, and other hard-to-replace energy assets.
Holy
Crimea's
shit.
leaders imposed
So they're going to have to abandon Crimea eventually, aren't they? Or it's just going to become a desolate wasteland, just like the far, far east of Ukraine. We see them videos of these. We watched one yesterday, right? The tree line, it's foggy. It looks like something out of some sort of post-apocalyptic show. That's what Crimea is going to turn into. It's just going to become... Look at all these civvies trying to get gas. It's just going to become a wasteland.
limits on the amount of fuel that could go to civilians, then required vouchers that only government employees could easily access, and now even the vouchers don't count for much. Satellite imagery and traffic mapping indicates that when people do get enough fuel to drive, they're mostly headed to the Kerch Strait Bridge, waiting in long lines of traffic to try and reach safer territory.
Yeah.
And by Crimean-occupied leaders' own admission, the drone strikes are now constant. Quoting one official during a radio broadcast from the territory, Crimea's air defense sirens don't go off anymore because, quote, sirens would be sounding 22 hours a day and nobody would get any sleep. At this point, Ukrainian operations would seem to suggest that they're running out of high-value energy targets on the peninsula itself. They're still keeping up pressure, destroying water infrastructure, communications equipment, and more, but at the same time, Ukrainian strikes have started to expand laterally toward the nearest Russian territory. There, Ukraine is destroying the oil refineries that prepare the fuel destined for Crimea, forcing trucks and trains to take longer, slower, and more obvious journeys, and raising the real possibility that they might be next. At every stage of this campaign, Ukraine's drone tactics come back to one simple but unavoidable principle: thinning the herd. Unlike the situation on the front lines, where Russia doesn't particularly value the lives of its troops and clearly considers them expendable, Ukraine is now targeting finite resources that Russia regards as essential.
Yeah, so this is a thing, like, they seem to have a hierarchy of priority. And unfortunately, a lot of these soldiers that they're throwing on the front line, bearing in mind, we've seen videos that have had footage of captives saying they get about 4 to 5 days of training, and then they wait around for 4 to 5 days before they're sent onto the front line with barely any equipment. They just don't care. They're just throwing people on the front line. And yes, they're going to consider a lot of these assets, whether that be energy, oil, whether that be food and water, supplies for the military. That to them is going to be way more valuable than their lives, unfortunately. So yeah, taking out that stuff instead, it's going to work, innit?
No matter what, Russia must keep moving fuel and supplies to Crimea, and it must keep as many of its refineries and other facilities operational as possible. That means there isn't really a world where Ukraine deters Russia so completely that it just moves its valuable resources into safer areas outside drone range. Russia is under pressure to push resources into the conflict zone, despite the danger, so everything Ukraine destroys makes future drone strikes even easier. Bridges, for example, are choke points. Blow up half of them and the rest have to handle double the traffic. Trucks, in ordinary time, saturate the roads, and individual trucks and their drivers can try to hide in a crowd. But when there are only a couple of trucks on the road, Ukraine only needs to put a few drones in the sky to keep up. Destroy a few refineries, and Ukraine can expect the others to be working at full...
Imagine being one of them civvies on that road trying to get out. It's getting blown up by the Ukraine drones. I wouldn't want to be in Russia anymore either. I'd want to move to a completely different country, wouldn't you?
Full capacity when they're eventually hit, because Russia has no choice but to try and fill its shortfall somehow. Now, in just a moment, we're going to talk about why Russia cares about Crimea so much. But before we get there, a quick pause to tell you about our subscriber site. Fronts.co is our outlet for all the stories we don't have space to do justice here on the main channel, a place where we could dig deeper and go nerdier than we ever do on YouTube. Every week, we upload 2 exclusive videos, 2 expert-written articles, and a podcast or 2, all covering the conflict and geopolitical stories that matter most to you.
So this is geopolitical stuff. Fronts.co. I don't know what other videos they do. I'm presuming it's more than just the Ukraine war. That's really interesting. It's cool when creators do stuff like this, isn't it?
Often our coverage is focused on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but we
Oh.
also host plenty of pieces on Iran, Sudan, the Sahel, Europe, and elsewhere. Not to mention all the minor conflicts that the rest of the world tends to ignore.
I think that's super important. Again, I am such a big advocate on getting as much information out as possible. It's so important that the word spreads. And not only that, momentum keeps going with this because it's so quick these days that the news just moves on to the next thing. The news is barely talking about the Ukraine war anymore. They've got bigger things to talk about, like the reflective pool outside the White House or other stupid, mundane stuff. Meanwhile, this war is still going on, and we need to keep that momentum going of the word being spread.
Just recently, we published a free-to-read analysis on how badly the Russian military is hurting itself by lying and exaggerating about its battlefield advances. We also offer multiple free-to-listen podcasts each week, including our Middle East Roundtable on the Iran conflict, as well as our twice-weekly email newsletter, Warfronts Weekly, where we give you a first look at the emerging stories that our team is tracking. A subscription to Fronts costs
really
just
cool.
$5 a month or
I might subscribe
$50
to
a
that.
year. Again, that's fronts.co. Check it out. And now, back to today's video.
Yeah, I might check that out, actually. That's really cool.
Decay and dismay. So look, as we've already laid out, Ukraine's strikes against Crimea don't happen in a vacuum. Crimea is in such an acute state of crisis because Ukraine is chipping away at the much larger network that sustains the peninsula, whether from the occupied territories or from mainland Russia. But that's hardly a one-way relationship, and now the impact of the long-range Crimea campaign is starting to show up elsewhere. Russia's biggest challenges have come on the front lines, especially in the southern oblasts of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. These are areas where the fighting has been relatively less intense compared to what's happening in Donetsk, but Ukrainian and
Yeah, Donetsk is where we're watching most of them videos. When we watch the footage out in Ukraine, like I'm pretty sure the one yesterday and the day before that, were all in that region. That is a region that truly looks like it's out of the Fallout franchise. It's just horrendous. There's just houses that have been leveled, and there's Russians hiding in basements, and there's different tactics that are going to be used for that. There's dead bodies everywhere in the tree lines. There's tripwires everywhere. There's mines everywhere. It is a true wasteland, that area. That's the Donetsk region.
Russian forces are still continually engaged in combat. Those Russian soldiers rely on Crimea as a supply base and a real logistical hub, where, before the recent changes, Russian commanders could count on consistent deliveries and other forms of support. But when Ukraine destroys the infrastructure that brings fuel into Crimea, it also destroys the infrastructure that would allow the military supplies to move out. According to both the Russian Milborger class and the reports emerging from the Ukrainian side of the front line, Russia's troops in that area are under extraordinary pressure. At the start of the year, Ukrainian troops achieved several limited victories and territorial recaptures in the south.
I didn't think about that, getting the resources out of there as well if they've not got any fuel. I didn't think about that whatsoever.
But now, Russian troops are starting to withdraw from key territory without a fight. A prime example of that change is what's happening on the Kinburn Spit, a long, thin sandbar that stretches out toward the mouth of the major river that marks a portion of the front line. There, Russia was forced to abandon several key positions, and Ukraine has even managed to place a flag on the territory, although the sandbar remains contested for now. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Russian leaders have continued to helpfully illustrate just where Crimea fits into their hierarchy of important territories. It's less important than Moscow or St. Petersburg, of course, and Putin isn't yet willing to abandon the front line in order to make sure that Crimea is protected. But as we've alluded to, Crimea is extremely important to Russia in its own right. It's a highly symbolic territory, both because it represents the pinnacle of Russian conquest and because it's been held up as such a clear success case for the cultural Russification of the occupied territories. It's very important to Russian elites as a high-demand vacation spot and for the Russian military as a supply hub, a base.
Couldn't it be so bizarre if Ukraine actually take Crimea back? I don't know whether they would. But if they did take Crimea back, that has got to be one of the biggest gut punches to Russia, maybe ever, right? What do you think? Do you think they would ever take Crimea back? Let me know in the comments.
For the Black Sea Fleet and a strategic anchor in a complex, important part of the ocean. Even worse, Moscow has poured immense sums of money into the territory to remake it in the Russian image, connect it to Russian territory, and increase its perceived value and importance in the eyes of the Russian people. As former Ukrainian Minister of Defense Andriy Zagorodnyuk explained it to the Wall Street Journal, quote, "For Putin, Crimea is turning from an asset to a liability. This was his signature acquisition, and he is unable to exercise control."
Wow.
Now, for all those reasons, Russia really can't stop itself from defending Crimea. But this is exactly the Ukrainian trap that we mentioned earlier. It costs Ukraine very little to keep hitting the peninsula, especially in a long-range campaign where Ukrainian soldiers aren't at immediate risk. Russia, meanwhile, has to keep pouring air defenses, fuel, soldiers, and supplies into Crimea by any means necessary, including by replacing trucks, ferries, and even bridges wherever it can. Abandoning Crimea is simply not an option. That's an admission of defeat that Putin couldn't hide, and that
That's the thing, like, they can't abandon it. Like, it would be the most embarrassing thing for Putin ever. Because at the end of the day, his image is reliant on propaganda of saying that he's doing well. And so the moment he starts, like, not being able to show that by Crimea literally being Ukraine territory, that's his ego. That's where I worry about him using, like, nukes or something like that, when his ego's truly, well and truly, like, demolished.
his military operation probably wouldn't survive. The only path forward is to continue pouring resources into the territory in hopes that something might change on the Ukrainian side. Right now, though, there just isn't any sign that Ukraine would start slowing down. With all of that being said, we do want to emphasize that a Ukrainian ground operation to retake Crimea remains highly unlikely in the near term. Ukraine faces several strategic and tactical barriers that would make an offensive nearly impossible. Serious and chronic manpower shortages, substantial occupied territory between Crimea and the Ukrainian front lines, and the fact that because Ukraine destroyed the bridges onto the peninsula, it would have no choice but to attempt an extremely risky amphibious landing. But right now, Ukraine doesn't...
Like a mini D-Day. But yeah, like, this is why I think it would be... I just can't see it happening, but it doesn't mean that they can't absolutely terrorize the infrastructure to make it such a liability. And like he's been saying in this video, they're using it as a jump point for their resources to keep the war going. The moment that stops, wow.
Need to reclaim Crimea directly, and the resource trap that Ukraine has built for Russia might actually be more valuable in the long run. After all, if Ukraine keeps up the pressure and continues to make Russia bleed, then an eventual operation to retake Crimea will just keep getting easier and easier. There is, however, one major symbolic victory that Ukraine might try to achieve relatively soon: the permanent destruction of the Kerch Strait Bridge. Recently, Ukraine has kept up pressure on the bridge, launching enough drones in that direction to keep local defenders on guard, but it hasn't really been a primary target, and there's good reason for that. According to Ukrainian intelligence officials, the bridge has been structurally compromised for some time, which is part of why Russia has restricted the transfer of heavier loads, especially fuel. But by destroying all of the other bridges and mechanisms that Russia has been relying on to transfer fuel, Ukraine creates the same critical bottleneck that it's made everywhere else. Soon enough, Russia will only have two choices: ship fuel across the compromised bridge, or don't provide fuel to Crimea at all. The trouble, of course, is that those fuel shipments can be targeted, and if Ukraine manages to strike a large shipment at the right time, then it can convert that Russian fuel into a massive bomb on a compromised bridge that would have become Crimea's final lifeline. As of today, the bridge is overwhelmed by those traffic jams we mentioned earlier.
This is the thing, like, it's overwhelmed with civvies trying to get out of there, and so it almost feels, you know, like you would be the bad guy if you start blowing it up when civvies are trying to escape, right? We don't want that. Obviously, we want all the civvies to be safe. If all the civvies can get out of there and be safe, and then they can blow up the bridge, happy with that.
Civilians who've realized that it's time to leave. For that reason, Ukraine isn't likely to strike the bridge at the height of the evacuation. But once that traffic thins out, and there's less stress on the bridge apparatus itself, Russia might try to bring large shipments across, providing the opportunity that Ukraine has been trying to create. Or maybe Russia doesn't take the risk, and Crimea runs out of fuel, and then air defenses, and then perhaps even soldiers. For Moscow, it's a lose-lose proposition. But then again, that's what the siege of Crimea was built to create.
Absolutely fantastic video by Warfronts. There's a reason they've got 1.37 million subscribers. Absolutely brilliant bit of information. I'd love to know what you think about the Crimea Peninsula, the Crimea area, and what do you think Ukraine should do? Because obviously it is being used right now as a way to cripple the front lines for Russia, and rightly so. Like, it's becoming such a pain in the ass for Putin. But at the same time, like, they can't go and take it, and there's civvies on there. So what do you do? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I will leave a link down below to Warfront's video. Phenomenal video. Go give him a subscribe. Check out Chug. 10% off. Get yourself one for this summer. Check out Morale if you haven't already. And other than that, I love you all. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.